On this video, I will be talking with you about my discontent and my dissatisfaction and how these negative emotions have resulted in my embodied language. So I'm going to read something to you, and it's a long piece. So I would say take a seat and just allow me to introduce you to my view about embodied language and how embodied language is made possible by our discontent. Now here, I will put my phone here on the side. That is a good place here. Yeah, that's good. So in this writing, I will explain and explore how my repeated dissatisfaction in my younger years with my own interactions, but even more so with how people talked with me and how people treated me, resulted into a profound sense of discontent. I felt so very disappointed. And whatever I did, whatever I tried to change things, it only seems to make things worse. As a consequence, in my early 20s, I'm now 67, in my early 20s I began talking out loud with myself. And this is how, to my own amazement, first not really believing it myself, I discovered the great difference between my own disembodied language and my embodied language. And disembodied language and embodied language, the difference between these two is that in disembodied language, which is our usual way of talking, we do not listen to ourselves while we speak. And the new way of talking, embodied language, is the way of talking in which I began to listen to myself while I speak. I believe it is important for others who want to have embodied language instead of disembodied language to fully accept and to know that unless our dissatisfaction with our own disembodied language becomes what we might have called divine discontent, divine discontent, unless we become so incredibly discontent with our disembodied language, the door to embodied language will not be opened. So discontent sets the stage for your embodied language. However, when I talk about divine discontent, I'm just using an old term. I absolutely am not talking about spiritual growth, because embodied language really implies the very end of any kind of spirituality. Once you have embodied language, you don't care about spirituality anymore. Spirituality is make-believe. Spirituality is the replacement of what you really want, and that is embodied language. I was raised in a Catholic family. From an early age, I felt bad about myself because I didn't seem to be able to pray like other people did. And I also did not believe what I was told. From a very early age, I already doubted things and I already felt that it was not true what they were telling me. And I felt bad about myself because other people believed it and I couldn't. And I felt like I had to do that. I had to also believe that, but I couldn't. I write this text to let readers know that they must be utterly frustrated with their own disembodied language, which is our accepted, our expected, and our involuntary way of talking. I have often addressed the wonderful aspects of my embodied language. But to get to embodied language, we must first deal with our disembodied language, and that is an arduous task. Even if we have already discovered the great difference between our disembodied language and our embodied language, even if we have felt that we always actually unknowingly only wanted to have embodied language, we still give up on it because our history of conditioning with disembodied language is so strong, and it is triggered again and again and again. It is true, with embodied language, our new way of talking in which we listen to ourselves while we speak, our involvement in language itself, so being busy with language, it becomes less and less. So the more embodied language you have, the less involved you feel with language. It's a very odd phenomenon. But with disembodied language, which is our usual way of talking, with disembodied language in which we do not listen to ourselves while we speak and try to listen to others, or we are trying to make others listen to us, we become more and more entangled and obsessed about and preoccupied with our language. So we become also what I call verbally fixated. Yeah. What this means is that due to the absence of language, our problems decrease with embodied language. So embodied language means that you are having less language, and then also your problems decrease. These things go together. But with disembodied language, our problems increase due to an increase also of your involvement in language. Also, our effective, correct use of language is to use language as minimally as possible. So this is another something that took me totally by surprise, that to talk as little as possible is actually the correct way of using language. Anyway, although I have already addressed this matter many times, I keep being astonished about my ability to be less involved in language these days. And all of that is, of course, because of my ongoing embodied language. Not too long ago, I would readily and easily come up with something to say or something to write. But these days, while watching and hearing about the horrible things that are going on, all the anti-ICE protests, all the chaos that is again being created there in Minnesota, 2 people have died now, it is horrible. And all this anti-Americanism from the left, all this widespread Marxism and socialism, or whatever you want to call it, it is all just so anti-American, anti-capitalist also. In the light of all of that, I experience a sense of being without language, as if I seem to have ran out of words to describe what is going on. Surely I am put off, I am disappointed, and the wordlessness is such that I don't feel any urge to find or to look for words and to say or to write something. And this is all in spite of the fact that I'm still writing and that I still produce this text and that I still post on X. But this is how I feel about things. I feel put off, and my wordlessness is such that I don't feel any urge to look for words to say or to write something. The amount of time without words has become bigger, and the amount of time spent with words is becoming less. And yet something is gained, and it's all for the better. The amount of time without words has become bigger than the amount of time spent with words. Yeah, that too. That's so strange for me. Or for, I would say it's probably true for everybody. And something is gained from this. And what is gained is only revealed in my language, in those moments that I speak again or that I write again. With words, I always feel like I'm doing something, but without words, I just relax into doing nothing. And I've always liked doing nothing. And I've always liked doing nothing, and only if words emerge from this nothingness do I enjoy what I say or write. This process that I'm in right now, it has been a long time coming. I can be like this, and I can adhere to my own experience of how my language works. I'm talking about my embodied language, of course. I'm not obliged to anyone to talk or write in any particular kind of way. This is my freedom, my language enlightenment, which has its own expression. And I return to my silence, to my wordlessness, unannounced. At any moment, I can withdraw. It's so peculiar that at any given moment, I just leave my writing, I leave talking, I just turn around. I don't know. It's just amazing how I do that. In disembodied language, by contrast, everyone remains involuntarily busy with language. But with embodied language, I participate only voluntarily in language, and this means that my emphasis is not on what I say or what I write, but on being without language. So as I'm saying this, as I'm reading this, it seems as if these words are important, right? But these words, they take you into being without language. And that is where my attention goes. Although I still write and speak, I abide in my wordless realm. Lately, I have responded with my embodied language to many current events, which always involve disembodied language. Anyone can, of course, accuse me of participating in the same reactivity that everyone else is involved in. But I do not view it that way. My knowledge about languageology is nothing else than my history of conditioning with embodied language. And I have acquired such a history of conditioning while others haven't. And so when I talk about languageology, that is the science of spoken language in which we recognize that there is, of course, a humongous difference between when we listen to ourselves while we speak and when we don't listen to ourselves while we speak. So that is a science which can only be discovered if you take it on yourself to sort of speak with yourself and to listen to yourself and to determine for yourself whether this difference occurs. Yeah. And so when you begin to talk with yourself and you begin to practice this science, which is then a single subject design, because you are just trying it out, so to speak, you are just testing it, you're verifying it, you begin to speak with yourself and you hear yourself, and the speaker is the listener. And then you have embodied language. And then you realize, like, wow, this is entirely different from not listening to yourself while you speak, from the old way of talking in which you are not in touch with yourself. Yeah. And so That is what languageology is. And so my knowledge, yeah, if we talk about knowledge, we talk about knowledge as if there's something inside our head, which is knowledge, yeah. But that's not what I mean by knowledge. My knowledge is acquired by my history of conditioning, and that means that I have had embodied language, yeah. And so, and I have acquired that history of conditioning while others haven't, because others do not know the difference between disembodied language and embodied language. Others do not know about languageology, they have not explored it. Naturally, everyone, in one way or another, experiences in disembodied language a sense of going back and forth between sometimes being more upset and sometimes being a little bit less upset. Yeah, sometimes being very stressed and very tense and worried, and then perhaps being a little bit less concerned, a little bit more relaxed and unconcerned and calm. With disembodied language, we basically just fantasize about and we glorify the illusion of happiness, and we dread, we deny, and we try to get away from our own unhappiness. I always go back to my embodied language since I can come back to it. So even though, I'm also just a human being and I can also be still pulled into some disembodied language, but I always go back again to embodied language because I can and because I want to. So it happens, but nothing is lost. As a matter of fact, anytime I still have some disembodied language, it actually reveals something to me which I didn't know already. So I always go back to my embodied language since I can come back to it. And unlike others, I can also admit with my embodied language that yes, I have disembodied language, while others who also uh, um, they also engage in disembodied language, they are unknowingly incapable actually of admitting that. I have no problems at all leaving behind my embodied language. Yeah, you could call it your comfort zone. I can engage with people who have disembodied language. As a matter of fact, I do it every day. Yeah. uh, so I have no problem at all leaving behind my embodied language and being temporarily again immersed in the disembodied language of others. And I say disembodied language of others because I know that I am in favor of and responsible for my embodied language. And so I don't take any responsibility for anyone's disembodied language. And I also don't take any responsibility for my own disembodied language. I used to, but I no longer do. I always come back to my wordless reality every time I was involved in language. Because, of course, yeah, as I was saying, when you are involved again in disembodied language, your overall involvement in language becomes exponentially bigger. And when you are involving yourself in embodied language, all of a sudden you're less involved in language. It's so interesting. And so going back into my wordless reality, my non-involvement in language, yeah, I feel so happy. I always go back to my wordless reality every time I was involved in language, and I explain also every time I have language, I explain with my embodied language what is going on in disembodied language. Yeah, that's what I do. And yeah, so that's how I live and that's how I enjoy my life. And of course, all of this is possible. Yeah, it happens because it is possible. It is not happening because I want to or I have some point to make. No, it just rolls off of my tongue, so to speak. It is just something that happens by itself because it can happen. I enjoy making fun of the disembodied language of others, although I recognize my humor doesn't please them. I have done what they have done, and therefore I always laugh about myself. When I laugh about others, I actually laugh about myself. I recognize what they're doing. Since I might slip back again in disembodied language now and then, my humor isn't always as funny as I would like it to be. Yeah, I, I can't help not being funny, and not being able to laugh about disembodied language, it still signifies something isn't entirely clear to me. My humor is always about embodied language. It is about laughing about myself, not about laughing about others. Many times my ability to describe the behavior of others, it may seem cruel, but my intensity is part of my embodied language. In the past, I felt so very guilty about that. I wished that I could laugh more about myself than about others, but later I found out that I have actually always been laughing about myself. Besides, I'm not going to hide the fact that everyone with their stupid, sordid, disembodied language, everybody is generally speaking making laughing about ourselves impossible. Yeah, and because you're not allowed to laugh about yourself in disembodied language, you are only allowed to laugh about others. And it seems that humor is always about laughing about others. It's not about laughing about yourself. It's so weird. I've said so before, although disembodied language and embodied language are binary, binary that means that is one is going on, the other is absent. You can't have them both together. Because disembodied language and embodied language are binary, not all disembodied language is the same. Because some disembodied language makes embodied language possible. That is very interesting. I need to read that sentence again. I have said so before, although disembodied language and embodied language are binary, not all disembodied language is the same, because some disembodied language makes embodied language possible. Likewise, not all embodied language is the same, because some embodied language makes us slip back again in disembodied language. Everyone who is beginning to discover the immense difference between their disembodied language and embodied language will have to go through a process that can best be described as a purification process of discontent. This is in no way like anything one has ever experienced. After I had just discovered that I could have embodied language instead of disembodied language, everything became different. And because I was able to go on with my embodied language, I stumbled on many delightful new understandings every moment of the day. Naturally, I wanted to share these wonderful experiences with others. Occasionally, there was one or two people with whom I could share my experience, but basically, I felt constantly misunderstood and rejected. The more I tried to share my wonderful experiences with embodied language, the more my experience of embodied language itself became precious to me, while at the same time I became more sickened by and disgusted by disembodied language. The only way I was able to continue with my embodied language was to go on with it by myself, by talking out loud alone with myself, by listening to myself, by feeling soothed by its self-reinforcing effects, and by recovering from the pain, the sadness, and the trauma of not being able to have embodied language with others. It wasn't until much later, after I retired from my position as a psychology instructor, that I began to realize that disembodied language is our ancient group behavior, and embodied language is truly something totally new, as it is the language of our individual freedom, which was never before discovered by anyone in the way that I had formulated it. To stop my own disembodied language, I had to turn against the collective, and that would only happen if I dared to remain dissatisfied with how everyone interacted and how I was also inclined to talk with others, but not with myself. In effect, I had to somehow learn to trust my own disgruntlement, my sadness, my unhappiness, my judgment, because only I knew the difference between disembodied language and embodied language. And more importantly, I knew how to find my embodied language back again and again and again, each time I lost it and ended up with disembodied language. There hasn't been one time in all these years, I started in my early 20s and I'm now 67. There hasn't been one time that I wasn't able to find back my embodied language. I kept being puzzled that there really was no gradual movement from disembodied language to embodied language. So there is a sudden shift. All of a sudden you hear yourself and boom, you're feeling it. You are all of a sudden charged with energy. You're listening again to yourself. And so disembodied language and embodied language, they are mutually exclusive. If one happens, the other is absent. So you can go from disembodied language to embodied language, but also when you go from embodied language back again to disembodied language, then your embodied language is gone again. It is undeniable. I either just listen to myself while I speak or I don't. And the evidence is always immediately felt. And these positive outcomes, they are not only instantaneously satisfying, they are also occurring over time. And therefore, these consequences of my embodied language, they are always beneficial. I have always achieved better circumstances for myself with my embodied language, even though while on that process, my dissatisfaction with disembodied language kept increasing. While I kept doubting if it was true that I had really found something that nobody had ever before discovered, my low self-esteem began to change, in spite of the many, many mistakes and missteps that I made, where I had to admit again and again and again that I was still acting out my own history of conditioning with my disembodied language, while I was trying to talk about embodied language. In this unpleasant and unsettling, unnerving process of going back and forth between having disembodied language, and then floop, I was again in embodied language, right? I experienced what I then later also learned about. I experienced conflicting contingencies, yeah, because these are two entirely different circumstances in which one has disembodied language versus embodied language. And it became clear, however, that the disembodied language which happened before I switched to embodied language was different from all the other disembodied language which didn't result in that switch. So, yeah, what happened before I switched from disembodied language to embodied language, that is a very specific kind of disembodied language. And it's almost like a peak experience of dissatisfaction, a peak experience of frustration and of discontent. And then, kaboom, you are back again. It can drive a person nuts. But that is really how it works. Initially, I was vehemently against writing about my embodied language, as I wanted so badly to have spoken embodied language. So that's another frustration that I had there. Many people have told me over the years to write a book, to create a website, to market or brand my product. And although with my very limited knowledge back then, that was in my early 20s, yeah, before I immigrated to the United States in 1999, my early 20s was before that, because I was practicing embodied language already for some years in the Netherlands. I had my own company, which was called Open Communication in my country of origin, the Netherlands. And although I gave many well-paid seminars and lectures and sessions to groups and individuals from profit and non-profit organizations, although I was even affiliated with the biggest speaking agency, although there was even a millionaire who was so intrigued with embodied language that he wanted to pay for a ghostwriter who was then going to publish a book about it. So he wanted to pay. But the funny thing was, he insisted that he wanted to sit in on the process where I was talking with this ghostwriter, and then he would supposedly learn from our conversations but it just didn't work that way, because that whole process did not produce embodied language. It was a complete disaster. Embodied language wasn't going to be learned from a book. And so I viewed written language as the biggest stand in the way for the development of our spoken embodied language. As my ability to have embodied language increased, my disdain and my repulsion and discontent with disembodied language, it just kept on growing. And it's also so paradoxical, because on the one hand you feel this wonderful experience of embodied language, but at the same time you feel the dreadfulness of all this disembodied language. Oh gosh. And of course, to the extent that your embodied language keeps going, yeah, you can sort of just see all these things attenuating, but that can only happen if you are honest about your discontent. So the decrease of disembodied language and increase of embodied language is always the result of a new history of conditioning with embodied language, which replaces the history of conditioning with disembodied language. What we call knowledge is, of course, a behavior, which is the outcome, the reminder of previous behavior, which alerts us when we are about to engage again in dangerous or self-harming behavior. We usually express this as dissatisfaction. We don't want to feel threatened We don't want to feel hurt. We don't want to feel shamed. We don't want to feel upset and stressed and angry. We don't want to feel negative. Yeah. So whenever something wrong is going on, we innately, yeah, whenever there is a threat, basically, because something wrong means that biologically speaking, we feel threatened, we innately try to escape, or we completely try to avoid any kind of discomfort, any kind of danger. With ongoing embodied language, we get so good at avoiding that we become capable of keeping costly, risky, escape survival behavior at a bare minimum. So this is an important piece where behavior can be viewed through a biological lens, and where you have then three types of behavior: avoidance behavior, escape behavior, and approach behavior. And these are the three innate behaviors. Each organism approaches something, and if there's danger, it escapes. And if it is good at escaping, it stays alive. So if then the avoidance behavior become more prominent. Yeah. So you can tell from such a brief explanation that avoidance behavior is, of course, the most important behavior, because with good avoidance behavior, we recognize the danger, we stay away from danger as much as possible. Our chances of survival are the biggest. Yeah. So we only approach what is beneficial to us, and we don't approach anything which is harming us. Yeah. So this is yeah, you can make it into a ratio, and then you get a particular picture which is a healthy ratio, and another picture in which it is skewed, where you approach things which are not good for you. Yeah. Then you approach too much. That means that you have to escape too often, and that means that you are running a lot of risk, and that means that you are harming yourself, and that means also that your avoidance behavior is not effective. Yeah. So this is a way of just looking at human behavior. So again, we don't want to feel threatened, and we innately try to escape or to completely avoid any danger. With ongoing embodied language, we get so good at avoiding that we become capable of keeping costly, risky, escape survival behavior to a bare minimum. In other words, with embodied language, we learn to only approach what is beneficial to us. Our embodied language restructures the ratio of our three biological behaviors: approach behavior, escape behavior, and avoidance behavior. In effect, we approach less and less because we get better at discriminating danger, and our avoidance behavior by far takes up the biggest part of the ratio. This goes completely against what we are used to with our disembodied language, because with disembodied language, we are all unknowingly experiencing some kind of Stockholm syndrome as we involuntarily approach things or stay with people which are not good for us, from which we at some point need to break away. We need to learn how to escape from these people, or we will certainly become abused, wounded, impaired, or even, in the worst case, killed. Surely, with disembodied language, the ratio of our innate biological unlearned behavior will look very differently. Yeah, it goes without saying. With disembodied language, we are unhappy with our lives. Yeah, and so to increase that unhappiness, to become aware, as we say, of that unhappiness, that is actually what is needed to get to embodied language. And the Stockholm syndrome that I was just explaining is just a way of saying that everybody is born and raised in disembodied language, We don't know any other way of dealing with language. And so we do not build up that history of conditioning with embodied language, which counteracts our history of conditioning with disembodied language. As stated, discontent, this is a little explanation about that word, discontent. Discontent is a general feeling of unhappiness or dissatisfaction with one's current life or one's situation, which with embodied language is always viewed as the inevitable outcome of one's own particular behavior. So, a sort of a general sense of malaise, a sense of meaninglessness, a sense of worthlessness, a sense of nothing matters. It's also, of course, dealing with depression. But that is discontent. But then we also have dissatisfaction. And dissatisfaction, can be about, I don't know, you're saying something stupid or you do something which is wrong. You forget your key. Okay, you find it back again and it's done, you're over it and you move on with other things. So, maybe there's a little anxiety with that, a little unease with dissatisfaction. Maybe shame or maybe some embarrassment that you did something wrong. But it is just a result of one particular action, of one experience. And it is always about whether we know it or not, expressed relationally. So when you are dissatisfied, you express that it went wrong and so forth. And it always comes out in a relation because you become, I don't know, you become upset or you become stressed or whatever. So what I'm here trying to say here is that discontent is a broader term that contains more negative experiences than dissatisfaction, which is just merely a sense of disappointment with one thing experienced or received. Our sense of dissatisfaction is what is. Our sense of dissatisfaction is what it is because we say it is what it is, and then we move on. Because we describe our annoyance with this particular circumstance in such a way that we allow ourselves to move on or to regain or to remain ignorant about it. It doesn't matter, we just brush it off. So talking about our lack of fulfillment or gratification from a particular experience or outcome always involves our disembodied language. So whenever we talk about something failed, something doesn't work, it's always disembodied language. And lack of knowledge about disembodied language also implies a lack of knowledge about what happens after the experience of dissatisfaction. With disembodied language, we expect outcomes which didn't and couldn't occur. So the more discontent we feel with our disembodied language, the more likely you will switch to embodied language because discontent is felt, it is a physiological sensation. You feel down, you feel no energy, life sucks. While dissatisfaction is very specific, it's only about one instance, one experience. Like for instance, you're trying to shoot the basketball at the hoop and you miss the hoop. Well, you gotta shoot again. Discontent is more intense. It is more negative. Something is always missing. Something is always wrong. Something in your life obviously needs the attention, but what is it? You have all kinds of questions, but you do not know what your place is in life. I felt that way for a long time. And you may, on the surface, make it seem as if everything is fine, but you are preoccupied with your so-called mind. You're preoccupied with the illusion of inner language, which is created by your disembodied language. So you believe that there's language inside of you, which is not true. So you believe in your mind, you believe in always being busy with your so-called thoughts, yeah, when in fact there is no language inside of you. And yet you believe that you're always involved in that. Very strange. And then there's also, of course, the question that you keep asking yourself, is this all there is? Or, what? I don't know, there's something wrong with me. What am I supposed to do? What's the meaning of life? Who am I? All these kind of questions. There's just no end to it. By contrast, dissatisfaction is more a neutral term. Yeah, so you shoot the hoop and okay, you missed, you shoot again. In case you miss the hoop, it can even stimulate you to practice more and to get better. That's what happened with me. I got pretty good at hitting the hoop with my basketball. And I can shoot with both my left and my right hand. And I've taught myself that in less than half a year. It is actually really nice that I got myself my own basketball. And so I can go to the gym or to any basketball court nearby and I can shoot hoops, you know. I like to do that. It's a nice warm-up. Anyway, so there is this distinction, right, between dissatisfaction, which is not such a big deal because, yeah, you know, you go on with other things and you restore yourself, or you just go on with something else, something that you are better at. Because why would you keep doing something which you are simply not good at? Because, I don't know, let's say for instance you feel like you have to be able to be good at something, but maybe you don't want to. Maybe you don't like to. Maybe you could be good at something else if you stop doing what you're doing. So anyways, if it is simply a matter of overcoming this one occurrence, this one experience, it's not a big deal. But if your whole life is one big dreadful misery, yeah, then you have discontent. Yeah, and so discontent is a much more severe, depressive, and yeah, and not only depressive, but it is also kind of like a negative feeling that you carry with you, a pain, a sadness, a wound, a trauma, something that keeps on reoccurring and demanding your attention, and you don't get, you're digging your own hole, so to speak. You don't come out of your, yeah. Anyway, so I'm just making that distinction to let you know how all of that is part of getting ready for talking with yourself, listening to yourself, hearing that, wow, when I hear myself, I hear a different sound. This is how I want to speak. This is how I hear myself. This is who I really am. So I've always felt deeply troubled by my own disembodied language, unknowingly for a long time. And then at a certain moment, after I discovered the difference between disembodied language and embodied language, I became even more dissatisfied with my disembodied language because now I know what the difference is. So finding out about embodied language, it creates a gigantic contrast with your, finding out about embodied language creates a contrast with your previous way of talking. And then, oh my God, you feel so burdened by it. You feel so, you have to overcome that. And that's exactly the motivation, the intensity that you need to have, that you cannot fail yourself anymore because you know that you can have embodied language. I felt so bad about my disembodied language, and you know what? I also often felt mistreated. Yeah, I felt mistreated. I felt it was unfair that somehow my disembodied language always led me to be in trouble. Very peculiar how I was always getting in trouble for disembodied language, which I could easily recognize in others, and they would never get in trouble. And I felt that this is just not fair, that I am always getting these bad outcomes for my disembodied language, while these people, they just go on with their disembodied language as if nothing matters. And it's only now that I'm older that I realize, no, that was all good, that I was feeling so troubled, because this is how I discovered my ongoing embodied language. Yeah. But back then I felt so oftentimes mistreated, and I felt so oftentimes that it wasn't fair. It is not fair, you know. Yeah. My disembodied language never worked for me. So in closing, two more paragraphs. In closing, I want to share with the reader my understandable resistance against anything written. Sorry. I want to share with the reader that my understandable resistance against writing has completely disappeared. Yeah, I used to be very much against writing, but it has disappeared. Partially, this was due to my going back to school when I came to the United States and getting a college education. And I went to the university where I got 2 master's degrees in psychology. And I also studied behaviorism, and I almost got a PhD, but I settled for a PhD. Yeah, not a PhD, but a PhD. I gave it to myself. I awarded myself a PhD for formulating languageology, the science of spoken language. And I'm glad to be out of psychology, to be out of teaching psychology, and to be out of behaviorism and out of all these academic worlds that I was in, because all of that deals with a particular group behavior. Very demanding group behavior in academia, in complete denial of embodied language. And I'm glad that I stuck to my own truth with my embodied language. And in part, that truth was also persisted by my refusal to write about embodied language, or my refusal. I tried, but I dreaded it and I didn't want to. But now all of that has changed. So disembodied language is the incorrect way of dealing with language. And it is absolutely wrong what is taught in every speech class, that one must first write and then speak about what one has written. So in a speech class, you are taught to write out your speech. I am totally against that. So yeah, you basically speak in a scripted way, literally. Embodied language, however, puts speaking before writing. So writing always reflects speaking and not the other way around, because that perpetuates disembodied language. If speaking comes first, then writing will support our embodied language. But if our writing comes first, it will prolong and continue our disembodied language, which then makes us overemphasize written language and underestimate and neglect our spoken language. And this is precisely why disembodied language is everywhere, and embodied language is nowhere to be found except by you, if you try it. Yeah, if you try it as a single subject design. I'm going to talk with myself. So yeah, we somehow reward printed language more than spoken language, which has always been a gripe of me, but now I fully understand why. And you can see also how this frustration with this has all, you could say, crystallized. Reasoning, this is the last paragraph. Reasoning with embodied language is entirely different from reasoning with disembodied language. In the former, experience comes first. Yeah, in embodied language, experience comes first and then understanding happens because of your experience. So in embodied language, experience comes first because the speaker listens to him or herself and is then feeling, sensing and experiencing directly with the sound of his or her voice, produced and listened to in the present moment, that he or she is calmly, voluntarily, verbally expressing the neural behavior of his or her own body. Conversely, in disembodied language, our direct experience is always tossed out in the name of being rational. Yeah, that is such a common thing. If you want to be rational, you got to stop being emotional, right? That is what they say. So in disembodied language, our direct experience is always tossed out in the name of rationality. Thus, in disembodied language, we only speak about the past or the future of our experience. And of course, we just, our past experience is something that we have experienced, okay? But the future is just all make believe, right? We just believe that it's going to be like this or that's going. So it's again expectations. So with disembodied language, we only speak about the past or the future of our experience, but never about what we experience while we speak. As long as we are not listening to ourselves while we speak, we cannot in real time talk accurately about our own individually lived experience. To refer to our experience in written language, so when you start writing about your experience, as we have historically always done because we couldn't speak about it with embodied language, so to refer to our experience in written language as we have historically always done is completely useless. Yeah. So all the books that are written are actually, it's almost unbelievable, but it is really true. All the books that have been written are all written based upon the fact that we are unknowingly engaging in disembodied language. And we couldn't say what we want to say, because in embodied language, we can say what we want to say. And so everything that has been printed is based on disembodied language. And also when we're talking about programming of artificial intelligence, all artificial intelligence is programmed with disembodied language, not with embodied language. It couldn't be. There's no data set of embodied language to program it with. So this is a very important point, that to refer to our experience in written language, as we have historically always done, is completely useless. We have written about it, we've read about it, and we have always believed that that is going to enhance us. It doesn't enhance us. We need to talk. We must have spoken communication, spoken language to get to our own experience. That is, we must adjust while we are speaking to our experience until we know for sure we have expressed our individually lived experience correctly with our embodied language. So, that is a great sentence. We must have spoken language to get to our experience. That is, we must adjust our language while we are speaking. We must adjust our language while we're speaking to our experience until we know for sure we have expressed our individually lived experience correctly with our embodied language. Lastly, once this is also an important part. Once you are able to have some embodied language, you are able to accommodate those with disembodied language. You can be kind, you can be accommodating, you can be friendly, you can be accepting, you can be open. Yeah. So once you are able to have some embodied language, yeah, you also want to share, of course, your embodied language with others. So you accommodate them, and you want to invite them, you want to let them know what you know, and you're willing to give and to, yeah. However, once you have some embodied language and you go to people with disembodied language and you accommodate those with disembodied language, you adjust to their disembodied language. This always happens at your expense. You are going to end up with disembodied language again because of that. You will again and again experience the humiliating, disrespectful, arrogant, ignorant rejection of those with disembodied language as long as you want to have embodied language with them. And by overcoming your own desire for embodied language, your disembodied language will not subside. So, so it is basically your own desire to have embodied language which makes you repeat your own disembodied language. And once you recognize that the other is just your experience, once you realize that the other is me, I'm talking with, yeah, how I see that person, how I feel that person, how I remember that person, how I describe that person. How else am I supposed to talk about that person? I'm always talking with myself. And that's what you discover in embodied language. And then, yeah, then your discontent, it dissolves. And then, yeah, then you go happily because you have said everything you wanted to say in the way that you want to say it. And then, yeah, you are without language, but you are not having any inner thoughts. You're not having any kind of mind. You're not anymore troubled. You don't believe in inner language. You don't have a mind. You're just totally without language once you are done speaking and listening and writing and reading. Yeah.